Everyone has that guy in their life. Could be your dad, mom, brother, priest. Anyone can be that guy. They never outright yell at you for being queer. They're much more subtle about it. They talk about not believing in being gay, that trans people are just confused, that they love the sinner but not the sin. I call this polite queerphobia, where people use a veneer of civility to hide their internal biases. While seemingly benign at first, this type of bigotry is a direct road to more violent types of discrimination. However, this stage of hate can be deprogrammed easier than a person who is fully brainwashed. But before we go in depth on that, let me introduce myself. I'm Sunny Dionysus, an artist, YouTuber, and most of all, an annoyance. My videos surround trans issues in my own empathetic way, so if that sounds appealing, be sure to like and subscribe. Polite queerphobia, or homophobia interchangeably for me, is a subtle form of bias that, unintentional or not, can be very damaging. This can come in the form of microaggressions, where subtle comments can be really discriminatory. For trans people, this can come in a variety of forms. Invasive questions about our genitals, misgendering or dead naming, and a general disdain for who we are. On this polite queerphobia phenomenon, Natalia Ramos writes,
"Our ability to discern and combat communicative prejudice is often seated in our hearts and not in our minds. It is often felt in our emotional viscera, but eludes our eyes and ears."
Meaning that even if some types of queerphobia cannot be rigidly explained or proven as bigotry, some remarks can still hurt our community. While these microaggressions seem small, it's a type of othering that is commonplace in most of society for trans folk. An example of how this discrimination can be damaging is a story from a viewer of mine, Theo. Quote, "I've had members of my own community insist that I still have a chance with straight men and that I don't count because I'm not further along in my transition. I find the assumption that due to my more feminine appearance, I would fulfill the same larger societal roles of a woman in a relationship, and the lack of regard for my sexual preferences or dysphoria is extremely frustrating. Only further spurred on by the fact that many people often just don't know better, nor do I have the words to help them understand." This is a common experience for many trans people, where the search for validity in ourselves is often rejected by people with ignorant intent. As Theo notes, this can even come from your own community. Not having the words to communicate how we feel hits really home for me too. Being put on the spot to explain and defend everything we are is intense, and for me, almost impossible. While I won't go in depth, and I'm not speaking about Theo here to be clear, I know that personally, my PTSD has inhibited my speech patterns since I was a kid. Years and years of transphobia makes me lock up when I have to deal with microaggressions in real life. And this is backed by studies too. Many trans kids experience some form of trauma as a kid that affects the rest of their life, including interpersonally. The UCLA states that
transgender and gender-diverse youth experience higher rates of both abuse and maltreatment and interpersonal and community-embedded discrimination than their cisgender peers.
However, trans kids are incredibly resilient when given proper love and care.
Despite facing higher rates of interpersonal trauma, TGD youth are quite resilient when able to access supports and affirming trauma-informed services.
And when I found a therapist that was gender affirming, I learned how to speak about myself again. PTSD is common within the trans community, And it makes sense that people like myself have a hard time communicating through that trauma to people who are confused or ignorant. However, I'm not putting any of the blame or responsibility on trans people to rehabilitate bigots. It would be incredibly unfair to ask that from people who are already struggling. Part 2. What does this lead to? Why does this matter? This polite form of homophobia can lead to online radicalization. Often, people with these biases can be highly susceptible to online communities that are targeting trans folk. In forums, Twitch streams, Facebook groups, there are many quote-unquote debates held that are an entry point for this pipeline. To explain how these debates help exactly no one, I'm going to focus on a specific topic and article. The lie that biological sex is binary and immutable. Note that this video is not in of itself a debate, but I will be backed by several scientists and scholars in the field. I'm going to link the article Stop Pretending Transphobia is a Scientific Debate for further reading in the description, since I'll be glossing over the meat of it. Mainly, I'm not a scientist and can't convey the material properly as she does, so it'll be best to heavily lean on her work. As she goes through this article and debunks many of the YouTuber's points, shown on screen for brevity, I realize something. Her cited work as a doctor won't change his mind because his belief is not rooted in her field, science. It's rooted in the thinly veiled tactical hatred of trans people. Quote,
"This debate never resolves because one side is fueled by a political goal to perpetuate the systemic oppression of trans people. They will not stop using science in this way until, frankly, trans people are eliminated."
By treating transphobia as if it has legs to stand on in an online debate, you are, even inadvertently, legitimizing the stance as something worth platforming. It's incredibly easy to lie on these platforms because transphobia is based entirely in feelings of cis people rather than the lived reality of trans folk. As she says while responding to this transphobic YouTuber, it's easy to just make up bullshit, isn't it? So how does this online debate culture relate to politeness? I posit that it's a ramp from microaggression to outward transphobia. Sally Hines in 2019 writes, "Research has shown how these voices have gained traction in political debate through the use of online media, which has often heightened tensions that are then debated offline, leading to further media coverage and entrenchment of position both on and offline." Which honestly, that's incredibly validating to hear from someone who has extensively studied the field of transphobia as a sociologist. These debates, used as an example of escalating transphobia, are just one route of radicalization. But there are many outlets for transphobes to disregard and limit our livelihoods. Part 3. The effects of polite queerphobia on queer people. This section is going to include various experiences of queer people, including my own. About a year ago on New Year's Eve, my parents were getting their ceiling fixed. A great family friend, Coffee, works for a business repairing home emergencies like this, so we had them over for a few nights in our guest room. Coffee brought along one of his buddies, D, from work to help out, so we all had a packed house. Now, I adore Coffee, so the next part of the story I put my all into. He called me downstairs with his buddy in the evening, and when I asked what was up, suddenly everything flooded out of T's mouth. He started off saying he loves his daughter and wanted the best for her, while Coffee lightly corrected him, saying he has a son now. He keeps going, talking rapid fire about his child in New York and how he's so scared and they had a drug problem, and my head was spinning. For context, I've talked to plenty of concerned parents of trans kids. I'm patient, an adult, and I have a baby phase, so they gravitate towards me sometimes for advice. Coffee wasn't being malicious. He knew I could handle it, and I wanted to help out. The concept of trans emotional labor is very valuable of a subject. However, that needs an entirely separate video to fully do it justice. To be clear, this guy was obviously very confused and maybe a little even ignorant, but I still did my absolute best to talk to him about his son. I believe about 3 hours in, we were winding down when Coffee made a T-slur joke in front of me and T laughed. Lads, I almost snapped there. It would have been very fair to start just screaming, actually. But I remember how much I love Coffee. I stuck it out a bit further and took their hand through why it's fucked up to say a slur as a joke. At the end, I mentioned that it was probably humor like that that alienated his son. I don't know if they ever reconciled, but I hope they both came to agreement to a new relationship. Kai, the son, if you're out there, I tried my damn best. I think about that experience I had when talking about polite homophobia. I struggled to come across as a quote-unquote good trans adult in order to make progress, and I recognize that part of that is a survival response to bigotry. It's also pertinent to talk about how other forms of prejudice combine with the trans identity. Race, in particular, is a large factor in how trans people are treated both by our community and outside of it. While I personally am white and don't experience racism, it's important for this video to address the racial discriminatory aspect of being trans. From an Anon submission, quote, I receive a lot of surprise, shock, and occasional disgust that I am one of those people, non-binary and aroates. Not a particularly androgynous person, and I think that's compounded by being a person of color. East Asian women tend to be sexualized, infantilized, and feminized by white people. And I think that's definitely comes into play with my gender and sexuality not being particularly accepted. People I have come out to have heard me talk, nodded, and then continued to use she, her, ignoring my orientation like I never said anything at all. I've stopped coming out to new people because honestly, it just makes me tired. I actually preferred it the one time someone was openly bigoted because at least with them, even if they hated me, they at least were pretending like I never said anything. At least they acknowledged me, even if it was negative. I just want to say, this is off script, but I'm sorry. that really sucks. And that really made me emotional, like even reading it. And I'm really sorry about that. Thank you for sharing. Having a marginalized racial identity like Anon not only adds to the discrimination they face, but also intersects with being trans. For me and many white trans people, it's important to understand that our whiteness does elevate our experience with discrimination. It makes complete sense that while my experience may be different from Anon's, our overall goal of equity is the same. For some, being acknowledged, even when negatively, feels like it gives credence to our existence. Like we can defend ourselves more. It's also pertinent to address when trans people have different experiences with polite queerphobia. I personally am fearful of more open bigotry and prefer polite exclusion, but I also understand that it's picking between two evils at that point. This polite queerphobia is prevalent in Christian communities especially, Soul, another viewer of mine, speaks about how their friend devolved from using microaggressions into using slurs against them. It's hard to explain, but it really seems like he was using his religion as an excuse to be homophobic and transphobic. A few weeks passed and he started to become really toxic. Started using the F slur and the T slur as slang until my brother called him out on it, and the religious guy ended up throwing a fit. After that, my brother completely cut contact with him. Throwing slurs is possibly the clearest sign of verbal disgust towards a minority there is. It's far beyond politeness, which is why many bigots in polite company decide not to use them just yet. That doesn't mean they don't hold the same sentiment, it just means they're better at hiding it. However, I don't want to view people as liars or bigots in disguise, even when it's practical. Soul's experience is common within Christian and Catholic company, and for me, it's so easy to hear and experience these stories and shut myself off from various communities. In fact, I wouldn't blame any queer person for doing that. Side note, not that Soul has done this, I'm just using my own experience as a jumping off point. As my frequent viewer, Jaden, puts it, while they may not realize it, opinions like these are incredibly harmful and can very easily lead to oppression and stigmatizing pride as something to be ashamed of. Oh boy, thank you for watching. I just want to say I am incredibly grateful for the submissions I received for this video. I fit most of them in bits and pieces here and there, so I really hope I was as respectful as possible. To be specific, thank you Theo, Jaden, 2 Anons, and Soul. I really appreciate it.